Hello, I am Paula Fontana, Vice President of Strategic Programming Initiatives with the National Black MBA Association. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us as we dig into a crucial conversation around reaching racial equity, with today's focal point being the education space. So, the mission of the National Black MBA Association is to lead in the creation of educational wealth building and growth opportunities for Blacks throughout all stages of their careers. And reaching equity is mission critical as it is the baseline to our members attaining those opportunities. And it is key to success of our partners, the communities in which we serve, and our country. October is Global Diversity Awareness Month, and it's a time to pay homage to the diverse minds and beliefs held by all cultures around the world. It's a time to understand and appreciate to become true citizens of the world. After the senseless killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, we have seen increased global visibility of racial injustice. And so there really is no better time than now to have this conversation about racial equity. Not only listening and learning, but more importantly, leading, taking that next step to truly ensure that we all have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country and becoming true citizens of the world. The association has called on our business and academic partners to really commit to this difficult and long-term work of improving equity and opportunity within their respective organizations. And with that commitment, having safe space conversations where we can highlight best practices that lead to solutions for other organizations as they navigate their journeys of reaching racial equity. It is my distinct honor to have this inaugural conversation with Brian Mitchell, Associate Dean of the MBA full-time program of Emory University's Goizueta Business School, one of our collegiate partners. Dean Brian, welcome, and thank you so much for your continued partnership in this work and for joining us in this vital conversation to move us forward. Let's immediately jump in and set the groundwork by telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and why reaching racial equity is important to you personally.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Thank you all for having me. And let me just first start by saying I've seen some of the promotional materials you use for this, and I'm gonna have to get you an updated headshot. All right. I don't know where you got my high school prom picture from, but I've got more of the academic look happening now. So that's my fault. That's my fault.
Right.
Let me thank you for having me, and thank National Black as well. Paula, I have a long history with National Black MBA Association as an advisor to your board, as an advisor to your previous two CEOs, and I met your new CEO last week. Congratulations on that, by the way, Amy Joe. But also, of course, you, Paul, I have the utmost admiration and respect for you. So there's nothing you could ask that I wouldn't lean into happily. So thank you for that. As far as my story, my journey, you mentioned my role here at Emory at the business school. I have two main responsibilities. I lead our full-time MBA programs, and I lead the business school's global strategy. But my path here, my journey, as you say, was not a direct one by any means. So let me take you a little bit back in time. I did my undergrad at Morehouse, so shout out to my HBCU family out there. I did my MBA here at Emory at Goizueta Business School. I also have a master's of public health from the Rollins School here at Emory too, because I spent the first 20 years of my career in the pharmaceutical industry. So I had a lot of roles over that time, but ultimately I was responsible for a business unit, a P&L, as managing director, which grew to over $600 million during the time I was leading it, which was about a little bit more than half of the revenue for the company at that time. So we were growing fast and having a great time, and we sold that business to Big Pharma for a little over $6 billion in 2010, and that was a great day for us. And as part of the result of that, earned an award from Emory, an Alumni Achievement Award. And when I came to campus to pick that award up, I began a conversation that, was a total surprise to me, but, about would I be interested in coming to work and running one of the programs. And so that's how, the twists and turns sort of got me here. And that was in 2011. So I'm coming up on 10 years here. It feels like a million years some days, and feels like a week some other days. But at this point, I'm the longest serving graduate program dean we've had at the business school. So I'm pretty proud of that. And one of the privileges of my job is that I do get to think about this topic and bring it into the work with me with a certain perspective. So this is very personal for me. This conversation about racial equity. Throughout the course of my career, I have seen that kind of cliche, and you've probably heard it, that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity definitely is not. And so I've seen that play out in business, and as educators of future business leaders, we have sort of this special obligation to help future leaders kind of see that, right? Not only when you take a look from an equitable standpoint, not only are you doing the right thing, but there's also a business case for that, right? You're also, there's plenty of literature, academic literature out there that proves that more diverse organizations actually perform better. And so the more we infuse this topic and the subject into our conversations, into our dialogue, and into our curriculum, the more we're preparing future leaders to go out and actually create that more equitable climate when we talk about business and society. So that is the approach that I have. It is very personal to me, and I'm proud to work in an environment that really embraces that here at Emory.
That's awesome. So when you talk about preparing future leaders, I've heard a terminology used there, day one readiness.
Absolutely.
How do you prepare students day one? When I think about day one, I think perhaps it's an orientation experience. How do you prepare the entire student body from day one to be able to address racial equity and realize it's important?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it does harken back to what you mentioned in your intro, because we're on a journey here at Emory for sure, right? And we took a very important step in that journey this year that was in no doubt related to some of the tragedies and the unrest that we saw over the summer. So the whole time, certainly the time that I've been in this role, from day one, and that is during when you're first introduced, so onboarding, orientation, the first day, we have invited members of our underrepresented minority communities into these conversations about the role of race, racism, inequities, how that shows up here in the business school climate, and how that shows up for you in your career. And those are really important conversations. But this year, we had some hard internal looks, here that led us to make the decision to broaden that conversation from those folks who are underrepresented and invite everybody in the community into those conversations from day one. And if you think about what that means in terms of the scale of the impact, when we were talking to our underrepresented students, we talked to somewhere between 10 and 12% of our student body every year. And we use a great book, and I highly recommend it. It's called Whistling Vivaldi, as kind of the level setting book for that conversation. It's a great book around implicit bias and stereotype threat and race and racism and other stereotype threats. But it's also great for coming into an academic environment and having those things, be burdens to you. So about 12 to 15% of our students this year, when we opened that up to everybody, we had almost 60%. We had 59% of our students participate in this conversation. And so that was a big step forward on day one to setting the culture of what, as a student, we expect to be able to talk about, to be able to work through, and to be able to include in our conversations about the role of race, racism in business and in life.
Awesome. And how does that day one readiness then play into when things like the tragic killing of George Floyd, for example, then how are you able to pull from that experience at the very beginning? Does it make it easier? Does it make it easier to have those conversations on a broad scale?
Well, they're never easy, as you know, those conversations, but it's certainly it certainly makes it more a part of our community conversation when we've started that conversation on day one. And we don't treat these episodes as just episodes, right? So when we talk about what's happening with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, I mean, the list is a mile long, unfortunately. When we talk about these things, we can talk about them as episodes, but we have to acknowledge that what we're really talking about is systemic. It's a structural problem, right? Racism is a structural problem. And so we have to create and foster structures that make this conversation not episodic. So when someone, when someone's in the news, it's not that moment that we start talking about it, right? We've been talking about it. And so it's more natural that way. And I do think, that does make it a bit easier, but it certainly makes it more natural. What it also does is it empowers students who are really personally affected by these kinds of tragedies, certainly our Black and brown students, but other students too, who deeply are passionate about racial justice, and social societal justice. It empowers them to not kind of stand back when these things happen, but to be empowered all the way through and have a voice. So I've found that, we have found that to be really a difference maker.
That is incredible. And that's really what it's about, is empowering the allies as well.
Sure.
So you mentioned something that I want to dig a little bit deeper on, the systemic changes that are needed. Yeah.
Right.
So as a leader in your organization, how much does your leadership play into allowing for that atmosphere of having the conversations that need to be had?
Right. And I talk about my privilege of being here all the time because, I use this term with my students a lot. You have to flex your privilege when you have it. And I am among a team of leaders who I think has really taken this journey to heart. And the conversation that I'm having with you, I've had, 100 times here about we have to treat structural problems with structural solutions. And so what I mentioned to you about day one readiness and what we're doing with Whistling Vivaldi in this conversation with students is at the program level. And I think it's really important to make progress at the program level that expands the scale. But what we've been able to do, and this is through the benefit of our leadership team from the dean's office and our most senior faculty members, what we've been able to do at the school level, I think is the most resounding and the most enduring change that we'll have. So at the school level, we had a leadership change and a senior associate dean for strategic initiatives. Mm-hmm. And the person who came into that role happens to be an African-American female, Jill Perry Smith. You may know her from your past here. Fantastic and brilliant educator and leader, not just in the business school, but throughout the university community. So that role in the past had always included our strategic initiatives like leadership, right? Like entrepreneurship and innovation, business and society. But what it now includes this is very new, Paula. This is as of this summer. What it now includes is explicitly diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strategic initiative that's led by this senior associate dean. What that does for the school is over and above the program level, it gives us a chance to program within the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So to create actual courses, right? And to influence our existing courses with this content that gets people to think about it in an academic sense, to study it in a formal way, to do projects around it. So it's a very, very meaningful difference. And that in universities, that's the language that we speak, right? The lifeblood of our universities are the faculty and the curriculum. So that's a huge change that we've been able to make this year that I think will pay dividends for us for many, many years to come.
Absolutely. That's great. So in order for systemic change, you have to change the system.
You have to change the system. Absolutely. Otherwise, well, if you don't, we're just, we're having candlelight vigils and we're writing statements and we're wearing black and we're taking pictures, which are all very important statements to make of support. But those are very tactical things, right? They're very in moments in time. Those are snapshots. And so, and if you just do that, then we stay in this mindset of treating these individual incidents like they're episodes, like they're singular episodes. But when you change the system, you start to see that these incidents are part of something bigger. And that is where real change comes from.
That's great. Is there anything else that you all have done to create more of a sense of belonging in the community so that you are able to retain diverse students as well as the diverse faculty and staff that you mentioned earlier?
So, yeah, so the retention of students, faculty, and staff is something that we work on constantly. And thankfully, leadership and representation does matter. And thankfully, we're well represented for our student-facing teams, and they have a lot of support. And also, we're very privileged on the staff side. We have a lot of senior staff who have been with us for a really long time and who are excellent mentors for our more junior or newer staff. And we also operate in Atlanta. We're privileged in that way. So we have a deep pool of diverse talent. On the faculty side, I think we still have work to do. It's a constant conversation and a journey that we're on. But frankly, it's not unique to Emory. It goes back to the history of higher education, certainly in predominantly white institutions, PWIs, where these spaces were not created for us to have leadership and influential roles. And so talk about systemic or structural or historical barriers. I mean, that's something that we at most research universities are still working our way through. But I do think that there are some strategies in place that are new and related to what I mentioned earlier, but not exactly what I mentioned, that are meaningful when we recruit and how we will retain talent. Part of the role of that, the job, the senior associate dean job that we now have, is an internal committee that's comprised of faculty and staff in diversity, equity, inclusion committee. And part of the role of that committee is to keep an ongoing conversation going, right? To keep issues of race and racial justice topical and to make it part of our community. And when you as an outsider looking in are thinking about, is this a place I'd like to work? Is this a place where I would fit in? Would I feel like I belong? When you see something like that and it's led by the faculty and the senior staff, that's a signal that I think few universities are putting out there, and we're putting it out there with a very, very deliberate effort. So our eye is on that, and we know we have work to do, and I think we're in the process of doing that good work.
That is incredible to hear, and I agree with you that you all doing great work. Before I ask my next question, I want to remind you all who are watching, if you have any questions for Dean Brian Mitchell, please feel free to put that in the chat, and we will try to get to them before our time is through. So I've heard so far some incredible things that you are doing. So kudos to you. Real question. What could you be doing better?
Real question. There's a lot, obviously, I think there's a lot that we as a society can be doing better, and that filters into all of our institutions. I will tell you that I mentioned that I'm a career switcher, right? My first career was in business, and now I'm in the academy. I'm in higher ed, and one of the things that can be very frustrating is the difference between the pace at which we work. So in business, you can do things really fast, and if you make a mistake, it's okay. We'll learn from it. We'll try again. In that process of iteration. At a university, and especially at a research university, remember that research faculty, their job is to create knowledge, literally is to create knowledge. And so there is no make a mistake or be wrong. The job is to create knowledge, which means to know. And so if you don't know something for sure, the inclination is to study it further, to study it more. And to do that takes time. And so much of our important work, in order for it to have the full influence that it can have, it takes a lot of time. The tension there, though, is that these issues of race, racism, racial justice, they are urgent. They are now issues, right? And so we need to be doing things and be making progress and demonstrating that progress now. And so we can't wait until we have it perfectly, exactly right, over years. And I do think, and I mentioned this earlier, I think we'll be in a far better place with some of the things that we have now structurally in place. But we can be doing a lot in the meantime to show that we respect and feel the same urgency that those most directly affected by these problems feel. And I don't think that all the time that's reflected in, university posture, just from a pacing standpoint. So I think we could be doing better. I do think that Emory and particularly here at Goizueta has been responsive to that tension. So we've done things that keep a conversation going, like making external statements and creating the programming that I mentioned in the program. These are things we can do now and not kind of sit idly by and wait for us to get it exactly right. And I hope that more institutions are taking that approach.
Great. So that actually leads me to my next questions about other institutions who are perhaps viewing but don't know where to start. They're at the very beginning of their equity journey, if you will. I think about all of the incredible things that you have done in your 10-year tenure with that university. So tell me, what recommendations would you have for a university who's just getting started on their journey? What are some things that they must do, let's say top 2 or 3 things that they have to do in order to get started?
Yeah, I think that I don't mean to oversimplify this in the 30-minute conversation that we have around the importance of engaging the faculty and looking at the curriculum. That's a very hard, first of all, it's a hard thing to do, but it's a hard thing to convince the institution to do. And again, our dean's office has been wholly supportive, not just supportive, but actually forward leaning and forward thinking in this, which has enabled us to move in that direction. But that doesn't exist everywhere. That does not exist everywhere where you have leaders who are willing to bend or I should say, be creative about curricular changes. And that is what endures in this conversation. I think it's real easy for a leader to say, fine, you can have a day to have a vigil, and those kinds of things are very easy to do. And again, they're very important to do, but they're also very easy to do and then walk away and go and do something else. So I would say don't underestimate or write off the importance of the faculty and the curriculum as a way to make statements around race, racism, racial equity, even and especially if your work has nothing to do with that, right? We're a business school. So there are some people who would say, well, this doesn't really belong here. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We create businesses and business leaders, but industries that structurally have been part of the problem for a really long time. So having a conversation in a business school is perfectly relevant when we talk about race, racism, and racial justice. So whether you're teaching law or medicine or in any professional or in the humanities, there's a conversation within your curriculum that can and should be having. So that's probably the most important thing that I think will actually have an enduring and large scale effect within the academy in the context of this conversation.
Great. All right. So a question came up. How can PWIs add more color to their leadership team?
It's a great question, Bernard. I don't have the magic answer to that, because I told you that I think we're doing pretty well on the staff side, and we still are growing on the faculty side. But some suggestions include, you got to get out there. I don't know, Bernard, where your institution is located. Like I said, we have the privilege of being in Atlanta, which is in itself a very diverse place. But if you're not in a diverse place where the talent is right in your backyard, you have to make the effort to go and find it. It has to be a priority among the leadership. And by priority, that means it needs to be written in some strategic plan. Some people have to be measured and accountable for what your leadership looks like. You have to have current leadership who are actually committed to it, and that's not always easy. Partnerships, like partnering with the National Black MBA Association, that's a shameless plug, but partnering with National Black to broaden your network of potential leaders, I think is really important. And for PWIs, especially on the staff side, a lot of leaders like myself can come from within the private sector industry. You don't have to find all of your leaders from within higher ed. And so there's something to be said for going out into industry and trying to identify leadership talent who can think strategically, who can manage projects and people and budgets, and bring them in to the academic setting and apply that talent in that setting. But there's no easy answer. I think showing up and actually looking for that talent is a step that a lot of institutions still need to take.
So piggybacking on that, how important is representation in this process? So as you are going to recruit, whether it be faculty, staff, students in that admissions committee, how important is it to have a diverse representation there?
It's huge. Representation is huge in every way. We talk about it. When you look at a movie, right, and you see yourself in that character, it just feels different. Wakanda feels like home, doesn't it? So it absolutely matters in every context, including where you work. We see it on the admission side. I know, Paula, you and I have had this conversation many times when we are recruiting for diverse talent. It's important that they see our faces and they hear that we mean what we say, because you can be from any ethnic background and really have a passion for this work. Mm-hmm. And that's very, very true. In addition to that, when you see us and you see that it's personal for us and that we have had shared experiences, we know what driving while Black is. We know what the talk is. We know these experiences that we share together, particularly as a Black community. That absolutely matters. It matters when recruiting students, and it matters when recruiting talent. And so you don't always have that to start with. And that's where partnerships become so important. And so if you are part of a team or you're one of a team and you're the only one who looks like you, and heaven knows I've been that guy for the better part of my 30-year career, partnering and trying to find institutional partners that can help you on that journey. It's worth the investment, and it's worth sending the explicit signal to people that you're trying to recruit, whether they're students, faculty, or staff, that you are vested and you are with them and they can be represented in your institution.
This is great. What recommendations, and this will be the last question, what recommendations do you have for student leaders currently in MBA programs to support the administration in advancing racial equity, both for the student body as well as staff and faculty?
Great question, Jesse. And good luck to you wherever you are. I'm presuming by your question you are a student. A couple of things that I would say support the administration. The most important thing is data around how meaningful and how important these initiatives are for you. And that data can be as simple as, I always say with my team, right? It starts with counting. So how many people show up to something? Mm-hmm. So Jesse, you can start a reading series around, the book I mentioned, Whistling Vivaldi, or any number of books. There's another great one that we have coming up by Beverly Tatum, Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria? It's a great book. And again, particularly about academic settings, right? By a brilliant author. Start a book club among students where you have that locus of control, right? You're not waiting for anybody else to do this for you. You're not waiting for permission. But then you take the data for who showed up and what they thought about it, and you show that to the administration to say, hey, this is important to us. We want more of this. Mm-hmm. And then help the administration and the faculty think about where other areas where this could show up in your learning journey, right? And I think that's really meaningful, in particular for faculty and administrators who are really busy, especially in this COVID time, trying to keep the institution going and running and care about these issues, but don't have time, don't create the time to think about how can we be doing this right now. So Jesse, as a student, you have a lot of power. You have a lot of agency in that discussion. So start with something like that, bring the data forward to the administrators, and that's really hard to argue with. I think you'll find some folks who are really willing to support you in that.
That is great advice. So really, whoever you are or whatever seat you sit in, help to amplify the issues. So that is That is wonderful. So I hear that we have time for one more question, and seeing who the question is coming from, I do not deny that it is perfect. Many of the strides in diversity are attributable to courageous leadership. With her transition, how do you see Goizueta maintaining momentum? And I will say, I'm going to start that with saying, with leaders such as you in your seat, Dean Brian, that is how Goizueta continuously maintains momentum. But I'll let you answer the question.
So I appreciate the question and the source of that question. So Donald, hello. And I will acknowledge that we are absolutely postured the way that we are postured because of the courageous and influential leadership of Dean James, who's moved on to Wharton. But I will say this, and I'm a student of many things. I wasn't a straight A student in physics, but I remember one of the laws, which is that a body in motion tends to stay in motion. And so you use the term momentum in your question. And I will say that we have a tremendous amount of momentum that is largely due to the example that our previous dean, Dean James, set us on. But she's also positioned us, myself, the other program deans, our interim dean, positioned us with momentum to carry these kinds of discussions forward. And I'll say this, Donald, because it's really important. These issues that came up over the summer, these things that were such catalysts, right? We were not dealing with these individual issues during our dean's transition. So during the transition from Dean James into our new interim dean. And so the reason why we were better positioned to start those conversations, though, was because what we had before this summer was a leadership culture that was empowered to speak up, and that was empowered to lean in, and was empowered to ask questions. I will never forget this, because it's one of the most indelible moments of my entire career, both at Emory and before, was a leadership call where, after the George Floyd murder occurred, we spoke about it on the call, and we reflected back to Ahmaud Arbery here in Georgia and Breonna Taylor. And I was brought to tears on that call, talking about it, and really feeling empowered to do so. And that is in large part because of the momentum that we have had in years past, and it's being carried through. So I feel like we're very well positioned. I didn't mean to bring you to tears there, Paula, but this is real. It's real stuff. It's heavy, and it's really important. And it is important that we don't just stop, when a leader changes, or we go through a leadership change, and use that as an excuse to not carry forward. And thankfully, our entire leadership team has continued on the momentous path that we were on under Dean James. So I appreciate the question and her leadership. I do think we are well positioned to carry on.
Right. I agree with you. And thank you for all that you continue to do to empower students and the community. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this valuable conversation with me around this important narrative. And thank you all for tuning in and being actively engaged in this first of many conversations.
Thank you.
If you are interested in delving deeper into this topic, LinkedIn Learning is an incredible resource to do so. In addition to the books that Brian mentioned, you can find content there such as the importance of mentorship and sponsorship in providing career opportunities, unconscious bias, skills for inclusive conversations, as Brian mentioned, that leadership team getting together, how to become an inclusive leader, are just a few examples of the curated content on allyship and anti-racism to add to your tool belt as you actively engage in your journey towards reaching racial equity in your spaces. We encourage you to continue the conversation in your respective organizations, as well as join us for our next discussion with Texas A&M University's Mays Business School on December 3rd. Additionally, all of the resources that we mentioned will be posted on our LinkedIn page for consumption at your leisure. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. Good afternoon.
Thank you.